Good evening, everyone. So I'm Jayesh from the School of Design at IIT Bombay. Uh, so I'm going to talk about grammar of VR storytelling. So the terms narrative, immersion, and experiential fidelity I'll talk about as I go on. So I'm going to talk about this in three parts. The first is the background and how we came to this topic, and this experiment that we did, and the inferences that we got. So, to begin with, when we are talking about VR cinema, we have to actually look at the two sides of that. One is the traditional film and VR itself. So, if you look at traditional film, it's essentially uh, sorry, visual and audio experience, and it's non-interactive. But VR is multi-sensory, and it's supposed to be highly interactive experience. Traditional cinema is frame bound, that is something like what you see right now, but VR surrounds us. So VR cinema has actually properties from both sides, and it's not exactly interactive, but it also surrounds us in each sense. So it falls somewhere in the middle. Uh, but if you look at grammar for storytelling for this media, traditional film has over a century of data on how it evolved and what can we do, what are the interesting things that we can do with cinema. Also, there's a lot of work happening in terms of narratives in VR itself. But for VR cinema, it's still evolving and it's a new field. So I'm more interested in the VR storytelling part. Uh, the interesting part about VR storytelling is the the nature of the experience itself. Because if to have an optimum experience, you have to wear a head-mounted display, and then you get to see uh, a small part of the larger environment. So this is an example from a video that we did in our lab. Uh, the thing is, it's also in it's although it's interesting that you can actually see it through your perspective and you can have your own POV. Uh, as a storyteller or a creator, you have to create a larger immersive space and usually an rectangular image or two of them, because sometimes you're working on 360 3D. So this you can see that only a small part of what you actually create that will be seen by the viewer. So users have the complete freedom to choose their POV and look at whatever direction they want. So this also causes a lot of challenge for the creators. Sorry. I'll just click. Yeah. So, which means the traditional storytelling methods cannot really translate directly to this kind of a medium, and it requires reconsideration. And it's not just my conclusion; there are other researchers working on the same area. So, for our initial study, we wanted to understand how can we guide the viewers in certain way through certain cues. So we looked at visual, audio, and depth cues, and our first attempt was to look at visual cues. So what we did is we recorded something what we thought is an intended POV, and we took other users, about 20 users, and checked what do they see on the first viewing. So this is one example from the other 20 people, and you can see that there is a starting point where everything is aligned, and then it's completely left to them to do whatever they want. But the interesting thing was that we found a lot of points where everybody unanimously comes together due to certain reasons. So we had to go through each and every frame of that, and one of my students sat through the entire all the videos with the grids on them and to figure out whether the POV what we suggested was achieved by the users or not. So that time we didn't have gaze or eye tracking options at that time. So this was a study we presented in 2017 previously, and we had some interesting preliminary guidelines. So that formed the back end of what we were trying to do. So I'm not going to talk about all these things, but let's just look at one of them, for example. So if you have an interesting plot point happening in this direction, and but at that moment you're looking at this direction, and the scene changes, and the next scene is supposed to start somewhere here, so you entirely miss that. So how do you take care of those kind of things? So what we did is we tried to look at all these guidelines and then create an entirely new film. It took us about 1 year to plan the film, shoot, manually stitch everything. We created 360 3D experience with spatial audio, and so it's called Dragonfly. So that brings me to the experiment part. So it's a 360 film with stereo 3D and spatial audio, about 11 minutes. It is actually a very emotional narrative, and it presents the journey of this protagonist called Aisha, uh, and how she copes up with the loss of her partner. So the experience is designed specifically for VR storytelling medium, in the sense that the narrative structure. So in the beginning, we looked at how, uh, from the top view, what are the plot points that we can list. So the numbers that you see are the plot points, and the direction of sometimes the character or some other object which moves, which has to have some attention given. We also saw the same structure in terms of the temporal mode, and you can see there's a scene one which is pretty small, and at the end of the scene one there's a large event, and then the scene two is like the journey of the character. And again, you can see the numbers there. So for the current study, we were looking at two things. One is the technical immersion, that is analyzing the perceptual cues, that is visual, audio, and depth cues. The second is the narrative immersion, that is we are looking at the content itself, how the story drives uh, the attention from one point to another. And we are assessing it through something called experiential fidelity, and that is the closeness of the user's experience to the intended experience of the storyteller or the director. So we had three broad research questions. Again, I want to mention here that this is a very qualitative assessment, and the technical immersion part has the quantitative assessment, which is a connected work. So the questions were something like how closely was the outline followed, and did they understand what is happening in the story, and how many participants understood that, how the emotion or the reason behind what actions they took, how were they interpreted by the viewers, and how much attention was given to this. We had like small things in the video for people to notice, and we wanted to know, are they kind of linking things up to make the entire story. Uh, so the experiment methodology is pretty simple. We got a good number of people coming for the experiment, about 99 participants. Uh, and this was entirely a sitting experience where you have a swivel chair and you can look all around. There was a pre-experience session where they were introduced to two other 360 films just to get an idea about how to be comfortable in that space. So during the experiment, we had the eye tracking data and the head movement. That you can see the colors, the red and the green, and every second there was a screenshot that was sent in the background to be saved so that we can check later. Post experiment, we had a subjective questionnaire, a short interview with the participants to understand whether they understood what is happening in the story, and a participant feedback. And for this paper, we are mostly relying on the subject part of the experiment. Although I'll just show you a quick video of the data that we got from the initial part, the eye tracking data, and this actually gave us a lot of interesting insights about where they were at a particular point, and what is the reason why people actually moved from one point to another. So it's really interesting how. So these are all the 99 people who were the participants. Okay. So, and we were very happy that people saw the credits properly, because usually if you put credits in one side in a 360 film, they sometimes aligned in some other direction. So we were very happy that it worked pretty well. So this is the 99 videos of all participants, and my student went through all these, and the last one that you see is an intended view that we proposed. So 2-3 times we recorded the intended view, and so this was actually on a large screen. So she had to go through each and every plot point to see how close it was to the intended view. So you can see it here a little better. Um, and based on that, we tried to kind of analyze it subjectively, how it worked for different participants. So in terms of the experiential fidelity with respect to the intended point of view and intended ROI is a region of interest within the point of view. So if you look at the temporal structure which I showed you before, this was the outcome. So if you see, all the dark green areas are the ones which had high affinity, that is the closest to what we intended. The light green ones had higher, at least above 50% of people. Low for the yellow is the lower one, and the peach one is the one where most people were misoriented. And again, we are really happy to see that in this particular one, very less places we found this. And we're not really sure is it because of the guidelines that we followed, but we actually went ahead with finding out what the participants had to say. So some of the observations from the analysis that brings me to the inference. Uh, Most of the participants mentioned about being present in the environment, and that is kind of obvious because it's an immersive 360 space. But one of the reasons we found strong was the spatial immersion. That is because it is not just 360; it is also 360 3D, which kind of gave them an idea about the another subject standing very close to them, very far to them, and when people move, they. In fact, some people also tried to move away when somebody got too close to them. Another interesting thing was the perceptual cues that we planned were very interconnected with the content. So it worked, it kind of helped each other, and especially the spatial audio. So I'll come to the spatial audio part in a moment. Another interesting thing was the VR medium. So some of the new participants were kind of fairly new to the VR film thing. They were noticing other things in beyond the story, like they were kind of conscious of the medium in between, that oh okay, how is this working, and is there a stitching and things like that. The experiences role was also interesting because some people tried to figure out whether they were part of the story, like because when the character is speaking this side, so they look back, sometimes they look down, whether so in our particular one it was a third person view, so there was no body, it is like an observer that you're there. uh, so we also had some plot points which were in opposite directions, and we expected people to look in that direction, and we had some cues for that. So what we found out that some viewers knew that there are two things happening. They started prioritizing on what is the most important one. Second is we also found that sorry, I'll just quickly. We also found that some viewers prioritize the initial direction, so they did not really move much. So they were kind of in this 180-degree zone. Um yeah, so the spatial audio was very interesting in this phase because that is something that you can trigger from outside the frame. Because if something is happening here and if you're not looking in the correct direction, spatial audio is something that can come from outside the frame, and that helps a lot of times people orient towards the plot point. There were a lot of subliminal, like small subtle details, which I think some of the viewers were very excited about because they kind of connected few things which others could not, and that kind of raised some curiosity. But at the end of the day, the experience is very subjective because some of the things we asked them, for example, the relationship between the characters, so it was interpreted based on their personal past experiences and certain things that they had. So the broader insights were that at the end of the day, the experiencer is the storyteller. So when they are in that space, they decide what is happening and what to see. Perceptual cues and the narrative immersion are kind of interrelated, which means when you're planning the content, we have to look at how are the cues being planned, and that's really important. We also looked at not just the position of the plot points, but also the duration, because I think the right balance is where people actually look at both. Otherwise, there was a misorientation. Participants with less VR experience, we found that they were sometimes getting digressed from the main storyline because the medium was coming in the way. And some of the participants with less experience in VR cinema, they were experienced with VR, but they were more in the traditional film watching mode. So they sit, but they don't explore beyond 180 degrees. So we found that in the first scene they did not, but in the second scene, because they got used to and the visual cues were slightly stronger, I guess. So they kind of started exploring more. But at the end of the day, again, deeper engagement was because of the content itself, and most of the people talked about something that they relate to within the content. So yeah, so that are the basic insights from what we found out. But in terms of our future work, there's a lot to do, and we hope that like we did for the first guidelines and then we created the new film, similarly we hope that these insights will help us create slightly better VR experiences, and our results seems to be really good compared to the previous one. And at the end of the day, we're thinking that probably in future we'll have some sort of guidelines to start with for grammar of VR storytelling, so the storytellers or filmmakers can have a better idea about how to plan 360 narratives. So yeah, thank you.